Imagine you're standing at the edge of a lake, and suddenly the ground beneath you begins to tremble. You feel like the world is ending. But then something even scarier happens. The entire surface of the lake erupts into the air and throws you into the water. You struggle to swim as superheated steam blasts you with temperatures reaching over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt rock and metal. Lava flows from fissures that have opened up in the earth. You're utterly helpless as you're buried under meters of ash and debris. This terrifying experience is known as a super-eruption. And while it might sound like something straight out of a disaster movie, they happen more frequently than you might think. So, what exactly is a super-eruption? What makes them so dangerous, and how have they shaped our world today? To answer these questions, we must first go back in time to December 16, 1980. At about 9:07 p.m., an earthquake struck near Mount St. Helens in Washington state. Measuring 5.1 on the Richter scale, it was felt as far away as Seattle. At first, locals didn't think much of it because earthquakes are pretty common in the Pacific Northwest. However, the next morning, they would discover that something extraordinary had happened. A massive landslide had swept down the mountainside and left a crater 1 mile wide and 900 feet deep. It was clear that Mount St. Helens had erupted, but this wasn't any ordinary volcanic eruption. In fact, it was one of the deadliest in U.S. history. More than 230 million cubic yards of rock, ash, and other materials were ejected into the atmosphere, blanketing 5 nearby counties in several inches of ash. Hot avalanches of gas and solid material called pyroclastic flows swept down the mountainside, incinerating everything in their path. By the time the eruption was over, thousands of acres of forest were destroyed and 57 people were dead. In the aftermath, scientists realized that what had happened at Mount St. Helens was actually quite rare. They classified it as a vapor or a catastrophic eruption. But just how catastrophic is a vapor eruption? To answer this question, let's take a look at some of the largest eruptions in history. The most famous super-eruption in history is undoubtedly Krakatoa, which occurred in Indonesia in 1883. This was a V6 eruption, meaning it was almost twice as powerful as Mount St. Helens. According to historical accounts, the eruption began in August when the island of Krakatoa experienced several smaller explosions. Then, on August 27th, the entire island blew its top in one of the largest eruptions in recorded human history. But this wasn't your typical volcanic eruption. In the lead-up to the event, steam, ash, and gases were blasted into the atmosphere, creating towering clouds that rose 10 miles into the sky. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a glowing red cloud that looked like a gigantic umbrella mushroom. Then, suddenly, the pressure was released in a series of devastating explosions. The first blast was heard 2,000 miles away in Australia. And within minutes, seismic waves from the explosion circled the entire globe 3 times. In total, the eruption ejected more than 30 cubic miles of material into the atmosphere, causing widespread destruction across Indonesia. Pyroclastic flows swept across the landscape at speeds of over 100 miles per hour. Entire villages were wiped off the map and over 36,000 people lost their lives. But while Krakatoa was one of the deadliest volcanic eruptions in history, it was nothing compared to the largest eruption in recorded human history. That distinction belongs to Mount Tambora, which is located on the Indonesian island of Sumba. The eruption occurred in 1815 and was so massive that it caused temperatures around the world to plummet by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. For 2 years following the eruption, there was even less rainfall in India and China, leading to the worst recorded famine in Indian history. During the initial explosion, an estimated 50 cubic miles of material was ejected into the atmosphere, but subsequent eruptions continued to blanket the island in ash for the next 3 years. The massive ash cloud blocked out the sun and caused global temperatures to drop by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. Crops failed and famine struck across the northern hemisphere. More than 10,000 people died as a direct result of the eruption, but tens of thousands more perished due to starvation and disease in the years that followed. It was such a cataclysmic event that some historians even claim it helped cause the end of the Napoleonic Wars. So, while super-eruptions are relatively rare, they've had a profound impact on our world. But just how much do we know about them? Unfortunately, not nearly enough. Prior to the early 19th century, scientific instruments capable of measuring volcanic activity simply did not exist. As a result, scientists have only recorded 50 super-eruptions since the beginning of human civilization. However, geologists estimate that there have been between 500 and 1,000 super-eruptions throughout Earth's history. But how do they come to that number? Well, it turns out that super-eruptions leave behind telltale signs in the geologic record. Layers of ash that are found all over the world help scientists determine when these massive eruptions took place. By studying ice cores and sediment layers, researchers have managed to identify over 24 super-eruptions that occurred before the beginning of recorded human history. One of the most fascinating things about these ancient eruptions is that they show no signs of slowing down. In fact, some recent studies suggest that super-eruptions may be becoming more frequent. According to some experts, this is due to a phenomenon known as the hotspot effect. This occurs when a large body of magma builds up beneath the Earth's crust. The pressure from the magma eventually causes the crust to fracture, allowing the magma to escape. When this happens, the magma chamber is drained and the pressure is released. However, the process can also trigger other magma chambers to become active, leading to a chain reaction of volcanic eruptions. Some scientists even believe that we are currently in the middle of a super-eruption cycle that began about 25,000 years ago. If this is true, then we may be due for another super-eruption at any time. One of the most likely candidates is Yellowstone National Park, which is home to the largest active volcano in the contiguous United States. Over the past 2 million years, the park has experienced 3 super-eruptions. The most recent occurred 640,000 years ago. But in 1985, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake near Yellowstone revealed something quite alarming. Beneath the surface of the park, a massive magma chamber had been slowly filling up. If this magma were to erupt, it could literally blow Yellowstone's lid. The surrounding area would be completely devastated and ash would blanket much of the United States. Well, the chances of this happening anytime soon are slim. There's no way to rule it out entirely. Which brings us back to the question, what would happen if a super-eruption were to occur today? Well, the devastation would be unprecedented. Entire cities would be obliterated and millions of people would lose their lives. The ash and debris would cause global temperatures to plummet, leading to widespread crop failure and famine. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of a super-eruption would be the release of carbon dioxide. Some estimates suggest that a single super-eruption could release between 100 and 200 billion tons of carbon dioxide. This would have a devastating impact on the global climate and could even lead to runaway global warming. Fortunately, there are very few places on Earth where a super-eruption could do this much damage. Most of these so-called supervolcanoes are located in remote areas of the world. For example, one of the largest supervolcanoes on Earth is located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Another is located in the middle of the Greenland ice sheet. Of course, this doesn't mean that we're completely safe. In fact, there are several supervolcanoes that pose a significant risk to human civilization. Mount Vesuvius, for instance, is one of the most active volcanoes in Europe. And if it were to erupt today, it would obliterate the city of Naples, Italy, which is home to over 4 million people. Then there's Mount Fuji, which is considered to be the most dangerous volcano in Japan. Over 10,000 people live within 6 miles of the volcano and many more within 30 miles. If it were to erupt, they would have nowhere to go. Finally, there's Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines. The most dangerous aspect of this volcano is not its lava or ash, but rather its toxic gas emissions. In 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted and released a massive amount of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. This gas formed a thick layer of sulfuric acid in the stratosphere, which reflected sunlight and caused temperatures around the world to drop by half a degree Celsius. If the eruption had been more severe, the cooling effect could have been much more pronounced. As you can see, super-eruptions are truly a force to be reckoned with. And while there's no way to predict when the next one will occur, we can take steps to mitigate the damage. In the aftermath of a super-eruption, it's important to remember that not all hope would be lost. Human ingenuity and resilience would allow us to rebuild and recover, but it would take a long time. It's estimated that it would take decades, if not centuries, to restore the global climate and economy after a major super-eruption. But in the meantime, we can learn from the mistakes of the past and build more resilient infrastructure that can withstand future disasters. Now watch! It snowed in the desert. Scientists baffled. Or check out, Doomsday Glacier worse than expected. Meltwater from here could flood the world.